Good morning, everyone. I'm Kathy Leone, and these are some of the stories coming today to Herald-Tribune.com. School safety is a top priority, but today the Manatee County Commission is expected to say it can't afford to share in the expense of putting more sheriff's deputies in the county's public schools, especially if voters this fall approve an additional homestead exemption on property taxes. Del White will be at today's meeting and will have this story. Peter Bartolotta, a past chairman of the Northport Economic Development Corps, filed Friday to run for the Northport City Commission District 5 seat. His filing means that elections for both city commission seats up on the November 2018 ballot will have at least 2 candidates. He's filing to run against incumbent Jill Luke, who won a special election for seat 5 and is running for election in her home district. Meanwhile, Pete Emmerich and Kevin Rouse have both already filed for District 4. Now, once the 2018 election is in the books, all 5 city commissioners will live within the bounds of the district they represent. A GoFundMe fundraiser has raised enough for half of the canines at the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office to receive ballistic vests. It is still going on, so they may still reach their goal to outfit all of the dogs. We'll show you how you can help. Plus, nearly 1,500 acres of cattle ranch bordering Myakka River State Park will be protected from development and restored to native habitat after the federal government recently signed off on a conservation easement. We'll take a look at what the $3.9 million wetland reserve easement really means for a portion of Blackbeard's Ranch in Manatee County. And reporter Chris Anderson has a year-long project that publishes today about former presidential advisor Steve Bannon. Bannon has a friend and business partner in Sarasota, Andy Badalato, who should have raised red flags in the background check Bannon had before he was allowed to sit on the National Security Council. And Chris joins us now to talk about this investigative project. Thanks for joining us here. So this is a year-long project. What really started it for you?
Well, what started it was in August of 2016, a couple days after Steve Bannon took over the Trump campaign, Mr. Bannon registered to vote at a Sarasota County resident named Andrew Badalato. Mr. Badalato lives in Nokomis. And Steve Bannon essentially declared his residency, that's where he was living, by putting that address on the form. It kind of stirred things up nationally for a couple days because people were wondering what Steve Bannon was doing in Sarasota County.
I remember that.
And running the Trump campaign from Sarasota County, which seems kind of like a logistical challenge, but that's where it kind of got some national attention. From there, I began looking into Mr. Badalato's past and also his relationship with Steve Bannon. And I also want to make clear that Mr. Badalato has never been charged with a crime. Mr. Bannon has never been charged with a crime. But Andrew Badalato's past, there are allegations of sexual assault. There are stock fraud cases and stock fraud and judgments in stock fraud cases, dealings with a mobster, and associations with a money laundering hub, as described by the Justice Department. So he's got a pretty questionable background, Andrew Badalato does. Steve Bannon and Andrew Badalato have been in businesses together over the years. They've got a relationship that goes back about 13 years, off and on. Andrew Badalato wrote some stories for Breitbart. Steve Bannon has been the producer of several conservative documentaries that are pretty well documented that Andrew Badalato was involved in. So they've got a pretty close relationship as far as I can tell.
And that's something that perhaps if this was known, well, to sit on the National Security Council, you go through thorough background checks, vetting and whatnot. So the issue is whether the FBI knew about it or, correct, if he put that down on sort of documentation that needs to be looked at.
Yeah, that's the big issue here. I mean, most people know who Steve Bannon is. A lot of people say Donald Trump would not have been elected were it not for him. And kind of as a reward, he became a presidential advisor. And Trump put him on the National Security Council, which is a major deal. Any top secret intelligence, he sees it. Decisions that were made, he had input. From North Korea to a travel ban to Iran, anything major, he knew about it. And to be in that position, when Trump put him on the National Security Council, that was the first time in American history a presidential advisor had been put at that level. And to get that kind of security clearance, you have to fill out a form called an SF-86, Very, you know, it's a very thorough process. The FBI checks into it. They interview everyone you've been associated with. It's a pretty big deal. It's pretty exhaustive. One of the things you have to list on the form are your past residences, which probably doesn't seem like a big deal, except for in this case, it may have been because according to the Sarasota County voter registration form, Mr. Bannon lived at Mr. Battalado's. Now, if Steve Bannon had listed the address on his security clearance form, then the FBI could have checked into their relationship.
Right.
Maybe that happened. I don't know. I never saw a copy of it. So maybe they did. Maybe the FBI did check into the relationship and they weren't concerned. Maybe they did check into it and they were concerned. I don't know. Or the possibility remains that Steve Bannon did not list the address on that form, so the FBI could not have checked into the relationship. Had he omitted that, it's a potential felony.
Yeah, any of those situations there, any of those are very interesting. But yeah, the potential felony is really the most interesting one there.
Well, the security clearance issue in the White House was a pretty big deal a couple weeks ago with a guy named Rob Porter. There were some domestic violence issues in his past that came up. And I think Rob Porter was President Trump's secretary, whatever position he had. It was a pretty important position, but not like Steve Bannon was. So Steve Bannon's security clearance situation, I'm sure, would be of great interest to a lot of people.
Well, it's a really interesting story. Of course, you can see or read more of this on Herald-Tribune.com, and you can find these stories and more throughout the day. Once again, at Herald-Tribune.com.